Have you ever felt as if your life was quietly changing, as if something deep within you was beginning to wake up? Not a loud change on the outside, but a quiet movement within your soul. One day, you look back at yourself, at everything you once believed, everything you once feared, everything you once chased, everything you once held on to, and suddenly, you realize you are no longer the same person you used to be. That may be the moment when a journey of awakening begins. Spiritual awakening is not something distant or mysterious. It does not always mean seeing strange visions, hearing mystical voices, or entering some high and hidden realm. Sometimes, awakening begins with one honest question: who am I? What am I really living for? Why does my heart still feel unsettled? Why do I seem to have everything people call enough, and yet still feel empty inside? And sometimes, awakening begins through pain, a heartbreak, a loss, a betrayal, a moment when you stand in the middle of life and no longer know what to hold on to. But in those very moments, if we do not run away too quickly, if we are brave enough to look within, pain can become a doorway that opens so we can go deeper into ourselves. The journey of spiritual awakening is not a straight road. It is more like a spiral of life. There are times when we think we finally understand, only to realize we still have so much to learn. There are times when we think we have let go, only to discover there is still attachment hiding in the heart. There are times when we feel full of light, and then one small challenge appears and reveals the shadow still living within us. That is why no two people awaken in exactly the same way. Some walk slowly, one step at a time. Some only wake up after a great turning point. Some repeat the same lesson again and again until they truly understand. Some seem to skip certain stages, but life eventually brings them back to complete the lesson that was left unfinished. Today, let us gently look at 5 common stages on the path of spiritual awakening. Not to judge who is higher or lower, not to claim how far we have gone, but simply to ask ourselves with honesty, where am I right now? What am I still caught in? And what lesson is life inviting me to learn so I can return more deeply to myself? The first stage is living unconsciously. At this stage, we often live very deeply inside the ego. We identify ourselves with our thoughts. We believe the emotions rising within us are who we truly are. We feel anger, and we think we are that anger. We feel sadness, and we think our whole life is made of that sadness. We feel fear, and we allow fear to make our choices for us. We get wounded, and then we turn that wound into the story of our life. When we live unconsciously, we react to life more than we truly live it. Someone says something we do not like, and we immediately become defensive. Someone does not meet our expectations, and we feel disrespected. A difficult event happens, and we believe life is unfair to us. An old wound is touched, and we once again believe we are a victim of fate. At this stage, the ego is strongly in control. It makes us defensive. It makes us angry. It makes us negative. It makes us see the world through a narrow lens, shaped by our own experiences. We do not truly see other people as they are. We see them through our fear, through our assumptions, through our wounds, through everything we have been through. So sometimes, another person may say something very simple, but we hear it as an attack. Sometimes, someone simply stays silent, and we imagine they are looking down on us. Sometimes, something is not even truly bad yet, but we quickly decide that life is against us. To live unconsciously is to let the past control the present. It is to let old wounds decide how we love, how we treat others, how we see life, and how we see ourselves. But this stage should not be looked down upon, because every one of us has lived this way at some point. What matters is that one day, we begin to realize, maybe life is not always the one making me suffer. Maybe some of my suffering comes from the way I see, the way I think, the way I hold on, and the way I react. That moment of recognition is the first ray of light. It is the moment a person begins to want freedom from their unconscious patterns. It is the moment when the door of awakening truly begins to open. The second stage is the falling apart of the ego. Some people call this the death of the ego, but it is not the death of the body. It is the falling away of the layers. We once believed were who we were. We once believed we were this name, this gender, this career, this status, this degree, these beliefs, these achievements, these failures, the stories other people told about us, the stories we told ourselves about our own life. But then, at a certain point, all of these things begin to shake. We look at the things that once made us proud, and they no longer seem enough to answer the question, who am I, really? We look at the pain that once defined us, and we begin to realize this pain is real, but it is not the whole of who I am. When the ego begins to fall apart, many people feel empty, as if everything they once held onto no longer feels solid. Their ideas about life, success, happiness, religion, God, the Buddha, spirituality, and even themselves begin to be questioned again. Sometimes they feel lost, sometimes they feel lonely, sometimes they feel as if they no longer belong to the old world they once knew. But within that emptiness, a new space begins to open, a space between the observer and the thoughts being observed. Before, when anger appeared, we immediately became the anger. But now we begin to see, there is anger moving through me. Before, when sadness came, we were completely swallowed by sadness. But now we begin to see, there is sadness present, and I am aware of it. Before, we believed every story in our mind. But now we begin to understand, not every thought within me is the truth. This is a very important turning point, because when we realize we are not only our thoughts, not only our emotions, not only our roles, not only the story of our past, then a deeper door in the heart begins to open. We begin to meet the quiet witness within, a part of us that is very still, very clear, very aware. That part does not need to compete. It does not need to prove itself. It does not need to chase praise. It is not destroyed by criticism. It simply witnesses. It quietly shines. It gently guides us back. The falling apart of the ego can be a very difficult stage because it takes away our old points of support. But for that very reason, it also opens a new possibility to live more truthfully, more lightly, less controlled by old patterns, and closer to the deeper nature of who we are. The third stage is the search for truth. After the old layers begin to fall away, a person often enters a powerful search. We want to know, who am I? Why was I born into this life? What is the meaning of being here? What is the right path? Is karma real? Does the soul exist? Is there life beyond this life? Is there a greater intelligence quietly guiding the universe? And if there is, how can we live in harmony with it? At this stage, many people begin to read, to listen to spiritual teachings, to look for teachers, to search for a path, to explore meditation, to pray, to listen to talks that speak to the soul, to seek out people who have walked more deeply than they have, not simply out of curiosity, but because there is a call within the heart, a longing to understand, a longing for light, a longing to wake up from years of living without clarity. This search is not only a search for knowledge, it is a search for the way home. Some people read one sacred sentence and begin to cry. Some people hear one teaching and feel as if someone has spoken directly to the hidden pain inside them. Some people sit quietly in meditation and for the first time realize how much noise lives within their own mind. Some people stand in a place of remembrance for their ancestors and suddenly feel they are not just one separate individual, but the continuation of many generations before them. Some people watch a leaf fall and understand impermanence. Some people go through loss and finally understand gratitude. In the search for truth, we may encounter many paths, many methods, many beliefs, many teachings, but the most important thing is not to collect as much knowledge as possible. The most important thing is to bring what we learn back into our own life and test it with honesty. A true teaching should make us clearer, kinder, more sincere, more loving, more responsible, less likely to blame others, more aware of cause and effect in the way we live. If the more we learn, the bigger our ego becomes. If we begin to look down on others, judge others, or believe we are more special than everyone else, then that is not yet true light. Truth does not make a person arrogant. Truth makes a person humble. Truth does not take us away from life. Truth helps us step into life with a clearer heart and a deeper compassion. So on the path of seeking, we need to keep our hearts both open and awake. Open enough to learn, awake enough not to be misled, open enough to receive, awake enough not to be carried away by what only looks bright on the outside, open enough to respect many paths, awake enough to know which path truly helps us transform our heart, build virtue, and live with more goodness each day. The fourth stage is when the true self begins to emerge. After a period of searching, experiencing, falling, and looking within, We gradually can no longer tolerate living falsely. We no longer want to smile when our heart is in pain. We no longer want to force ourselves to please everyone. We no longer want to live only to be approved. We no longer want to keep relationships where we must keep abandoning ourselves. We no longer want to do things only because other people call them success. Something very true inside us begins to speak. At first, that voice may be very small. It may only whisper, "This is not my path. This relationship is draining me. This work no longer nourishes my soul. I have been silent for too long. I have forgotten myself for too long." Then slowly, that voice becomes clearer, stronger. Not strong in a rebellious way, but strong in the sense that we can no longer keep betraying the truth within our own heart. This is when the true self begins to appear. That true part of us may feel very similar to who we were as a child. Before we learned to perform, before we feared being judged, before we pretended to be fine, before we hid our tears, before we lived according to the roles the world placed upon us. But returning to that truth is not always gentle. Some relationships will change. Some jobs may have to be left behind. Some old habits will fall away. Some familiar places may suddenly feel unfamiliar. Some people who once walked with us may no longer be able to continue with us, not because anyone is bad, but because the energy is no longer aligned. The connection has fulfilled its purpose. The road has turned. At this stage, old wounds may also rise to the surface. Pain we thought we had forgotten may suddenly return. Memories we thought were asleep may appear again. Emotions that were once buried begin asking to be seen. Because if we want to live truthfully, we cannot only choose the beautiful parts of ourselves. We must also be willing to see the wounded parts, the fearful parts, the fragile parts, the parts that were once abandoned, the parts that were once misunderstood, the parts that were not loved in the way they needed. There may be days when the heart feels like a storm. There may be moments when we do not understand why we are crying. There may be nights when old questions return. But this is not always a step backward. It may be a process of cleansing. Old things are being brought into the light to be seen, held, transformed, and released. At this stage, some people may also become more sensitive. Their intuition becomes clearer. Their dreams become more vivid. Their sense of energy becomes more subtle. They begin to recognize what feels aligned, what makes them feel heavy, what brings light to the heart, and what darkens the heart. But whatever we experience, the most important thing is to remain balanced. Do not cling to phenomena. Do not use special experiences as a measure of being higher or lower than anyone else. Do not fall into the illusion that you are above others. True awakening does not lift us away from the earth. It helps us stand more firmly in life, to live more truthfully, to love more wisely, to say what needs to be said, to be silent when silence is needed, to leave when we must leave, and to stay when true love really needs us to stay. The fifth stage is living in harmony. This is not an absolute ending. It is a more mature state on the journey of returning. At this stage, a person is no longer only searching for themselves. They begin to live in alignment with themselves, in alignment with the body, in alignment with the mind, in alignment with the soul, in alignment with karma, in alignment with life. To live in harmony is to stop hating ourselves for our limitations. We know where we are still weak, where we are still attached, where anger still lives, where fear still hides. But we no longer use judgment to punish ourselves. We learn to love ourselves with wisdom, not by excusing what is wrong, but also not by hating the person who is still learning to do better. We become a kind father, a kind mother, a good friend to the inner child within us. That child may have once been forgotten, not listened to, not protected, forced to grow up too soon, forced to be strong in order to survive. Now we learn to return and hold that child. We say, "You do not have to be afraid anymore. I am here now. I will not abandon you again." When compassion for ourselves becomes deep enough, we naturally become less harsh with others. We understand everyone is walking their own path. Everyone has wounds. Everyone has limitations. Everyone has places that are not yet clear. Everyone has lessons they have not yet completed. So we do not judge as easily as before. We may still see what is wrong, but we see it with awareness, not hatred. We may still set boundaries, but we set them with steadiness, not resentment. We may still leave a person, a place, or a relationship, but we leave with understanding. There is no need to curse, no need to carry hatred with us. Living in harmony also means we begin to feel more clearly our connection with the world. We no longer see ourselves as a separate little self. We feel our presence in the breath of the earth, in sunlight, in rain, in trees and grass, in rivers, in the song of birds, in the food we eat, in the work of countless people, in the blessings of our ancestors, in the invisible causes and conditions behind every meeting. We begin to feel more grateful for our parents, even if they were not perfect. Grateful for our ancestors, because through them, we are here today. Grateful for the people who loved us, and even for those who once hurt us, because they also helped awaken deep lessons within us. To live in harmony does not mean life will no longer be difficult. It does not mean we will always be happy. It does not mean there will be no more tears. It means even when difficulty comes, we do not lose ourselves completely as we once did. Even when we are in pain, we still remember there is a light within us. Even when we experience loss, we still sense that life is teaching us something. Even when we face the dark, we no longer look at it only with fear. We begin to look with understanding. Because in the journey of being human, light and shadow are both present. Joy and pain are both present. Gain and loss are both present. Meeting and parting are both present. If we only want to hold on to the light, while rejecting the shadow, then we are not yet truly in harmony. Harmony is knowing that every experience in life can become material for awakening. A compliment can teach us humility. A criticism can teach us inner strength. A success can teach us gratitude. A failure can wake us from illusion. Someone who loves us can teach us to open the heart. Someone who hurts us can teach us boundaries, forgiveness, and letting go. At some point, we begin to understand awakening is not about becoming a perfect person. It is about becoming a more truthful person, clearer, kinder, more responsible for our own energy, aware of what we are thinking, aware of what we are saying, aware of what we are planting, aware of what we are nourishing in our heart each day. So, if you are listening to this today and asking yourself, which stage am I in? Be gentle with yourself. Do not rush to label yourself. Do not rush to decide whether you are high or low. Do not compare your journey with anyone else's. Maybe in one area of life you are very awake, but in another wound you may still be unconscious. Maybe in your work you have become very mature, but in love you may still react like a wounded child. Maybe you understand many spiritual truths, but when real challenges come, you realize you still need to learn how to let go. And that is okay, because spiritual awakening is not a competition. No one gives a medal to the person who awakens the fastest. And no one is forever left behind if they still know how to turn back toward the light. What matters is, each day, are we willing to look at ourselves a little more honestly? Can we say one less word that hurts another person? Can we release one angry thought from the heart? Can we blame life a little less? Can we apologize when we are wrong? Can we be grateful when we receive? Can we pause before saying something painful? Can we choose what is good when something unkind is pulling at us inside? Just that is enough for the path to begin shining. We do not need to become someone grand. We do not need to prove that we are awakened. We do not need to tell the world how far we have gone. We only need to live in such a way that people feel a little lighter when they are near us. We only need to speak in such a way that our words cause less pain in this world. We only need to think in such a way that we stop feeding more resentment inside our own heart. We only need to walk in such a way that every step stays close to gratitude. That is already practice. That is already awakening. That is already returning. May each of us, on this ever-changing journey of life, whether we are still living unconsciously, moving through the falling apart of the ego, searching deeply for truth, learning to live as our authentic self, or practicing harmony with life, learn to be gentler with ourselves. May we have enough courage to see the darkness within us without falling into despair, enough wisdom to recognize the light within us without becoming arrogant, enough compassion to hold the parts of ourselves that have been wounded, and enough awareness to live a little more kindly than we did yesterday. Because after all, the journey of spiritual awakening is not about finding some faraway place. It is about returning to our own heart, returning to the light within us, returning to gratitude, returning to truth, returning to love. And when a person truly returns to themselves, the world outside may not completely change right away, but the way they see the world begins to change. And when the way we see changes, life begins to open a different path, a path that is more peaceful, more luminous, more truthful, and more kind. Thank you for taking the time to listen all the way to the end of this reflection. What has been shared today is not distant theory. It is a living energy drawn from real experiences, from challenges, from relationships, from moments of reflection, and from lessons learned in everyday life. May these words bring you a little peace, a little clarity, a little faith, so you can continue to grow, to heal yourself, to love others, and to walk forward on your own path of goodness. If you feel connected to this peaceful energy, please subscribe to Soul Lantern Journey to receive more reflections like this. And if there are questions in your heart, old wounds, deep struggles, or things you have carried for many years, but have not yet been able to release, please leave a comment below. This channel will listen with sincerity, and when the time is right, we will create more reflections to help bring light, understanding, and healing to what you are walking through. May each of us, wherever we are in life, find a peaceful path back to ourselves. Thank you, and I will meet you again in the next reflection.